Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is with utmost pleasure that I speak to you about Africa this afternoon. Africa is the second largest continent and the second largest populated continent. It has 54 sovereign states, and 16% of the world's total population is in Africa. And today I would be talking about rallying Africa to prosperity, the financing of development and transformation. Taking a look at Africa, we would expect a lot more to have been achieved with the natural resources and all that we have. But it's unfortunate that we haven't gotten to that point. And I would say that preposterous, that is the word to describe the situation wherein the continent with the largest arable land, vast natural resources, great number of youthful population, and an abundance of diverse talents remains the least developed continent. Yet, while Africans yearn for development and transformation in every area of their lives, the financing of such proves to be a very great challenge. At the core of Africa's development and transformation agenda is finance. While significant strides have been taken and the continent's economic performance with the average GDP continues to grow in leaps and bounds, the quality of this growth has not been sufficient enough to alleviate the poverty level in Africa. As well, there's a bridge between the widespread inequalities in the continent. The clarion call that consequently befalls Africans and its leaders is: how do we finance this development that we want? How do we finance this transformation of Africa? How do we sustain the resources we have? And how do we channel these resources to bet the Africa that we want? Now, a unique African proverb declares, "A man who does not know where the rain beats him cannot say where he dried his body." In other words, it is essential to recognize the important sectors with transformative power to push into prosperity, to push Africa into prosperity. Now, my presentation would examine a few ways by which African leaders can drive the much needed development, initially identifying key areas and the need for attention, and afterwards outline innovative financing methods and policies. Now, these major areas that need this finance include the infrastructure and industrialization, agriculture, energy and human capital development, which encompasses education and health service provision. Now, the finance methods that Africa can utilize to move herself forward. Because at this point, a lot of people, a lot of countries are always borrowing, which has crippled the economy, because we borrow a lot, and by the time we borrow, the income we earn, our GDP, we're trying to use that money to pay off the debt rather than getting that money and proceeding with development strides that need to be taken. Now, the first finance method is diaspora bond scheme. This would be a debt instrument issued by the country to source for financing from its diaspora. The advantage to this is that the diaspora usually have an earnest desire to contribute to their home country, to their home country's development, and tend to be less disinclined to convertibility risk. Indeed, the World Bank estimates multi-billions of dollars of African diaspora's wealth waiting to be tapped. In other words, what the diaspora bond scheme entails is when the government has a project to be executed and there's no money, we have Africans in diaspora that are willing to contribute into the sector. Now, these Africans can buy the bond of their country. In other words, providing the money for that project, which is like a form of investment, over time, the bonds they buy can yield more money. So rather than borrow money, they can use the diaspora bond scheme to generate money. Now, in Africa, Nigeria has tried using the diaspora bond scheme. The first diaspora bond scheme for $300 million in June 2017. By the way, the diaspora bond scheme has successfully worked in Israel and has worked in India as well, although it failed in Ethiopia in 2008 as a result of certain policies that were not favorable for them at the time. Now, I would go to the second point of future flow securitization. We all would agree that globalization has come to stay. There is nothing, we can't restrict globalization any longer. That's the way forward if we would truly develop together, regardless of being from Africa or Europe or anywhere else. Now, with globalization comes migration, because when there is globalization, people would move. Now, with reference to future flow securitization, there should be vigorous reduction in remittance costs, as this improves remittance flows. This includes innovative banking rules while avoiding over-regulation, improving access to banking for remitter senders and remitting receivers. As well, improving competition in the remittance industry. It is important to encourage banks to open branches in regions where it has recognized that the diaspora concentrates. This is essential for the success of another novel financing model. Securitization of the future receivables, such as remittances and exports receipts, is a tool for remarkable bond financing. The country commits such receivables as collateral. The aid is then invested entirely into a large-up scaling of infrastructure provision and industrialization projects, which in return generates investments. Although this scheme is fraught with constraints such as inadequate use of formal channels of remittance flow, poor legal frameworks, and the risk of reduction in a government's flexibility in managing external payments. Yet, if the reforms mentioned above, like what I just talked about, are undertaken, it offers a great access to the international capital markets, which means I am in Germany now. If I work and live here, if there is a proper scheme where my country in Nigeria, if I'm sending money, how money flows into the country, if there's a proper regulating channel, transparent channel, that the government can know, oh, this is the amount of money that comes, that remits from our diaspora, then they can use it as a bond to secure a loan. Now, I'll give an instance. The former president of Ghana, President John Kufuor, was here a few months back at the conference, and he said Ghana gets about $2 billion from remittance from its diaspora. Now, every country can implement this strategy such that the remittance from the diaspora has, it's very transparent, that you can quantify how much you get. And then you can go take a loan and say, oh, we would like to secure a loan for maybe 10 years, and we can give you our remittance. This is what we get from our diaspora, and use it as a bond, that we're sure that probably on the average per annum, you have maybe $2 billion. And with this, we can be able to pay this certain amount of loan within this time frame with this money that comes in. So that's the securing the future with remittances. Now, with mobilizing domestic resources, this involves broadening the tax base while revamping tax administration, reforming subsidies, refashioning national procurement systems in order to ensure efficient expenditures, and closing loopholes. Relatedly, it is unconscionable that African nations have lost an excess of $1 trillion in illicit financial flows over the last 50 years. This undermines the developmental efforts as domestic savings and growth of hard currency reserves are constrained. Indeed, it also serves as an excuse, albeit untenable by citizens and organizations, for the exploitation of tax and duty loopholes. It is only appropriate that mechanisms for revenue declaration transparency be put in place. Tax haven laws reinforced and anti-laundering measures pursued as a way of retrieving diverted money to be invested in sectors earlier mentioned. As well, leaders must also lead by example, shunning corrupt practices and not tolerating such in just circle. So we must put in laws that would ensure that everybody pays their tax at the right time. A lot of people don't want to pay tax in Africa because they feel if we pay it, our leaders would embezzle the money. But that's why I said it starts with leaders also leading by example, shunning corrupt practices, so that the tax that is supposed to contribute a solid income for the country would yield, and then it would be channeled into this development. Now, to public-private partnerships. With PPPs, the power in delivering outstanding transformation in certain sectors would be utilized. This involves private equity, either local or foreign. The government needs to play a key role in promoting private equity, especially by leading the intervention to raise awareness. It is noteworthy that these PPPs can only succeed if they are evidence-based, meaning conducting and improving impact assessment for projects that would be financed. PPPs are also important in combating the finance challenges in the sectors of human capital development. When you have public-private partnerships, it would grow industrialization. It is essential to note that for agriculture to thrive in Africa, it must move from the idea of a subsistence venture to being run as a business. Herein lies the advantage of using funds sourced from development-focused organizations, such as the African Development Bank, the New Partnership for Africa's Development, that's NEPAD agency, among others. To the fourth point of foreign direct investments. This is a veritable source of finance, and it usually attracts similar fashion as the local private equity I just talked about. Now, a brilliant African proverb suffices at this juncture. Until the story of the hunt is told by the lion, the tale of the hunt would always glorify the hunter. I would interpret that. Now, in essence, this means for you to attract foreign direct investment or private equity, you must provide a positive narrative for those investors. Because if you don't do that, then they wouldn't be encouraged to come and invest, because they would feel, what do we gain? What is there to offer? Is there any need? Is there any challenge to be solved? Now, it is about ensuring as a leader that an excellent investor perception, especially as concerning rules and regulation, the cost of doing business, the provision of an enabling environment, and development of appropriate policies, for example, providing tax concessions in the early years of investment, would attract investors. Now, to my last and not the least point, intra-Africa trade. Investing in new partnerships that enable authentic ownership of the transformation agenda is paramount. This includes enhancing intra-African trade, that is, within African countries. Now, a global South-South cooperation, this is beyond just Africa alone, and partnership with agencies focused on Africa's development, such as the African Union, the NEPAD, the African Development Bank, etc. And a South-South coalition to reform our financial system. Now, one financial decision that would improve the African economy is the creation of a unique and uniform African currency like the euro. Now, this would enhance intra-trade and would thrust African economies forward and deliver inclusive development. Now, the beauty about the euro is this. We all would agree that not all countries are on the equal level in the EU. Some countries are stronger than others. But the beauty about using the euro as your currencies, regardless of if I live in France or I live in Germany or I live anywhere where the euro is spent, I use the euro. If I go back to Africa, the exchange rate is high. I would have more money in Africa when I change my euro because regardless of the country, the strength of the country. Now, that's the beauty of having one unique currency. When the whole of Africa trades in one currency, then regardless of the strength of those individual countries, their foreign reserve also goes up because their currency becomes very strong. Now, a Zambian proverb declares that when you run alone, you run fast. But when you run together, you run far. It means that for Africa to grow, we can't just look at it as Africa, as like a single entity. I mean, I've seen foreigners that say, oh, I traveled to Africa, and then I ask, where exactly did you go to in Africa? You went to Nigeria, Ghana, South Africa. You need to be specific. A lot of times, people just classify Africa like it's just a single country. No, we are 55. We are much. And for us to achieve this goal together, this development, we have to work collectively and not individually. Yes, I know there are measures that are already being taken place. Just a few months ago, the CFTA agreement was signed, which is the Continental Free Trade Area, which means that for countries that have signed it, goods, persons, movements of business can occur between those countries that have signed without import duties. Now, not all countries have signed it. But personally, I would encourage every African leader to sign that agreement because I feel it just brings us closer to the 2063 agenda of the African Union. It's one of the goals. And I feel that each country trying to protect their own interests would only exclude some set of people, like weaken certain economies and then grow certain economies. And if we have to achieve this 2063 agenda, we can't run alone. We need to run together to go very far. Now, nonetheless, the exposition of these few financing options I have mentioned, it doesn't preclude other vital components. These include like creating sovereign wealth, enterprises, pursuing debt relief, and seeking official foreign aid. Now, I brought foreign aid completely last because I think it's high time Africa wakes up from the idea that we have to keep borrowing before we can achieve our goals. We need to think inward and use these methods of generating our own income before we seek foreign aid. Nonetheless, we can't rule out the options of asking for foreign aid, especially for education and the health sectors. And based on that, I would say that for Africa to develop, it takes myself, everybody that lives in Africa to put her joint efforts together, because the government is not an abstract term. The government is made up by human beings, which includes myself as an African and every other African in diaspora, as well as people at home. And so we can't just rely on our leaders and say, oh, the leaders haven't implemented the necessary policies. You can contribute your own passion. You can contribute your own ideas. You can be that leader that is not corrupt, because corruption has also been one of the things that has really crippled our economy. A lot of people don't want to contribute their resources, like paying their tax accurately, because they feel that, oh, this money is still going to be embezzled. And even the foreign aids that we have gotten, some of this money have not been channeled properly. So for Africa to truly grow, it takes everybody, all of us coming together, rebranding ourselves. When we rebrand ourselves, we can rebrand a nation. It takes a transformed man to transform a nation. And on that point, I would say that hopefully that all we have discussed in this conference becomes useful for the development of Africa now and other in time to come. Thank you. Am I open to questions or? Okay.
Hi, thank you very much for this impressive presentation. It was really very, very enlightening for me, let's say. Well, you talked about all these financing methods that go into looking at the bigger ways. What about the micro finances? Like, I think Africa is extremely rich in many resources in terms of culture, in terms of diversity, in terms of nature, in terms of also minerals and many other things. And I think also focusing on communities and finding a bottom-up approaches to support very small to small enterprises, family-oriented enterprises might participate in the. Of course, you were setting them up to the way forward, finding other solutions than lending the money from the World Bank and international organizations. But I think also it's because I come from Syria. I'm also coming from a developing country, and before the war there was this discussion about how to move forward somehow. And I think the micro level on finance also. What do you think about that?
Well, I spoke generally on the level of national government.
I figured out that.
Now, I would pick one of the points I used here, which is the remittance.
Yeah.
Take for an instance, I want to invest in Nigeria. I want to grow a small business. I live outside Nigeria. If there were policies involved that ensures easy transfer. Now, it's not so sweet transferring money back to Nigeria because the charges that go on it is on the high side. Nonetheless, there are small businesses that are actually springing up, not necessarily the finance coming from the diaspora. And I would speak of my country because at least I'm well informed, so I don't speak out of context. Now, there are small, medium, there's an organization for small, medium enterprise in my country called SMEDAN, which caters for people that have ideas and then they need financial support to bring these ideas to life. And the government supports them if your proposal is genuine and then the idea seems sustainable, then they support those people. But of course, everybody can't get that money at once. That's the challenge. For us, we are over 100 million. So there are businesses that grow on the local scale, but like I said, there have been developments, but it has not been sufficient enough to alleviate us out of that poverty level immediately. So there are opportunities for growing the micro business.
I understand
crisis.
within the region, the whole region goes up. Like, in
Or probably you're
and
relating
then
that
this will
to
help also to move things, even move the bigger things faster, the macro level faster, because they both contribute to each other. That's what my point was.
growing the domestic products internationally.
Yeah, I mean, like when you raise the level of the finance on a regional level, like on a smaller level, usually it gets healthier, and also basically also the foreign investments needs a very very quiet and relaxed atmosphere in order to attract the attention, and that's where you need really to stabilize
The
country
economy
and make
first.
it a little bit more relaxed. So basically you can start promoting it as tourism, or in terms of culture, in terms of reaching things that the name comes out, the brand nation, more or less.
Nation branding.
And that's where you can start bringing that foreign investment. Before that, as you said, it will be very skeptical and they don't know what to narrate
Yeah,
to these
to the investors.
companies. Yeah.
Okay, I understand you. Thank you for your contribution as well.
Thank you. for
Okay.
this.
Hello.
Yeah.
Thank you for this interesting presentation. Actually, my question is about the last financing method. It was
Intra-trade.
Intra-trade. Actually, you didn't really discuss the fact that I think limiting importation it will be the key, the first thing that we have to do in Africa in order to make our currency stronger. Because if we import more and export less, no, the opposite. If we export more, and we
report less.
the exchange rate really of our local currency, for instance, as for Tunisia, would be really low compared to other currencies. But we didn't really discuss about this one.
With regards to the intra-trade and exporting, I stand to be corrected. I'm sharing my belief. Now, I think for us to grow as a country, like Yara just said, it starts from promoting what we have. Now, I feel the intra-trade, the positive side of it is this. Before we take our money out of our continent to give people in other continents, we can grow our individual economies first. So Zambia is producing copper and Nigeria needs copper. Those things the copper can come into Nigeria without import duty rather than going abroad. Now, it doesn't stop Zambia from still exporting their copper abroad. But it means that for we amongst ourselves, we can get this product at a more affordable rate, which I think is good with the intra-trade. So it is promoting our local products, our domestic things first, before we welcome things that are foreign to us. Now, there would be import duties on things that are coming to us, and there would not be import duties on things that we're exchanging amongst each other. So I don't know if...
I understand it. But of course, we cannot cut completely the fact of exporting.
No, that doesn't cut exporting.
Yeah.
No, it
Because
doesn't.
in terms of industry, like Africa is still very far away, like from, yeah.
We still need a lot of industrialization. Like I said, that we exchange goods among each other does not stop us from exporting this cultural heritage, our products, our goods abroad. It doesn't stop us. Oh, by the way, it even makes it a lot more better, because by the time we export things abroad, then people see it and then get attracted to it, and then it's also a means of communication. Because if you see something that is unique with me, and then you find out, oh, please, where is this from? And then you mention the country, then you have created an awareness of that country. So definitely, exporting is very essential. Okay? Now, for the Continental Free Trade, not every country has signed it. Some countries have signed it, other countries have not, including my country has not signed it. Now, personally, I feel Nigeria probably doesn't want to sign it because we have a large human population. We have over 180 million. That agreement allows Africans in other parts, same way you have a similar Schengen agreement where people can go between those countries easily and goods can also move. Now, I feel my country probably doesn't want to sign it because we already have a huge population. And in Africa, we have a good economy, at least in comparison to other economies in the country, in the continent. Now, this would mean that there would be much more migration. Migration to Nigeria. Our resources, we're still struggling to use those resources to cater for the population that we have, and we have not been able to fully handle it. Regardless, I am not supporting Nigeria and saying that they shouldn't sign that agreement. I think they should sign the agreement because I think we should look beyond that. And I also feel that probably they're also looking into security because there are security challenges already that we are dealing with. And probably opening up the boundaries would allow all manners of people, every race, every, at least within the African continent, come in. Probably those are the fears of the leaders of my country, because when I read it, that was how I could interpret it. But I think outside that, I want to believe the agreement should be a very successful one because it would grow the individual countries. Like I said, Africa is not just a country. The AU is not just made up of one person. It's a collective effort. Collectively, we would go very far. And then I feel a lot of countries have also partnered with China of recent years because they have been able to give aids to African countries to develop them, to bring them from the category of developing country to a much more advanced country. I have not been there when they signed those agreements, but of course we all know that when aids are given, there are terms and conditions, but the government never lets us know which ones are very unfavorable. But we want to believe that with the little things that we have seen visibly, they've been good. At least it contributes to growth.
I think that then is misunderstood because I believe you were talking about a trade agreement. I don't know if in Africa that's implied that there have to be with the population that they can do across countries, but I thought it was just related to trade.
No. This agreement includes people. This particular agreement. She wanted to ask.
Hi. Maybe to continue with your question, I can speak for Kenya. I'm from Kenya.
Okay.
So, Kenya were a population of around 55 million, and we came up with an agreement because in East Africa there's Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania. So the Kenyan government had proposed for the Ugandans, Kenyans, and Tanzanians to be able to cross the borders, but Tanzania refused because Kenya has a stronger economic prowess. So the idea was for Kenya Ports Authority, which is the leading ports authority for constructing ports, that would have Tanzania to bring in, for instance, things like sugar, salt, maize, tea, and coffee, which are really used those are our main resources. But then it didn't add up because number one, Tanzania, the population, they are more. But in Kenya, we can get our own sugar and our own salt. But also Tanzania, the fear is, which I can speak freely because those are each other's will, or to have that open relationship where to allow other Africans to move freely within the borders, and
Mhm.
as you said also with the population differences and having different resources, it's very difficult to have that kind of integration between countries. Yeah.
Yeah. Last presentation.
Thank
I
you.
like the financing part, but I'm actually concerned when it comes to African scholarly exercise about
Scholarly exercise.
yes about the feature of economic development, basic foreign direct investments, basic trade, and it goes all and on. What we call economic logic of financial buoyancy or whatever, what have you, of the country's economic development. Put that aside, or side by side, what I'm going to say. We have a target. Millennium Development Goals have just come to an end. A sustainable development goal, the SDGs,
2030.
Africa is pressurized to catch up with some basic tenets of development, standards of development. We have not even reached Millennium Development Goals. And shouldn't there be new molding blocks for consideration of what we call at least meeting those development goals? Shouldn't there be new molding blocks for Africa, new ideologies? Because all what we are seeing is what is churned out to us as basic economic growth, basic economic development, and these are the cliches of what we call economic theories. And what should be our molding block? Look at what she's saying. African countries are definitely get scared of each other. Isn't there something, an ingenious approach to making ourselves wealthier and better for each other?
You have said a lot, so I would ask you back certain things to be sure what your question exactly is. So now you're saying we leave the financing, like we're supposed to have. Now, what are our motives in achieving our own personal goals?
Okay, I put it this way. We have tried to bring in foreign direct investments. We have tried trade.
Mm-hmm.
We have tried cross-border, the Nigerian Lagos, what do they call this, free
The border trade
border
back and
trade.
forth.
We have
Mm-hmm.
tried free trade agreements. We have tried West African trade agreements, low tariffs. We have done all the logical economies. What I'm trying to say is, and this is the morality of this conference, shouldn't we develop something more ingenious to us that forms the molding block of us meeting standards, basic standards of development? Like she expressed, African countries are scared or have mistrust for each other in some areas and all of that. So shouldn't Africa develop something beyond the cliche of development economic theories? Like, I'll give you another example. This is what we call the first tier of development analysis or economic analysis, where you talk about the products, you talk about copper, you talk about oil. The world has moved beyond that. Consideration of what we call primary resources. I'm just giving you insights to the answer I need. What can we do?
The question has gone very long, but I think I think I want to come in at this point.
I think what it's trying to say is
Mm-hmm.
we have been given for foreign trade, foreign aid, and all these things. It should be developed by now. Because there are a lot of foreign aids coming from different countries to Africa.
Foreign investment.
Yes, there are a lot of foreign investment, foreign companies coming to try to help us. But we're not going to still develop.
Now I would say this:
Do in
If-
Africa.
if you were here when I started, the first thing I said is an alternative to seeking foreign aid, and that's why foreign aid was my last point, because I said Africans we're always borrowing, and that borrowing of money we will say this is the agenda and this is what we want to achieve, and then we need financing, and that's why we have borrowed from the World Bank and the likes. We can't borrow again, and then China is financing us. And that's why I propose these ideas of diaspora bond scheme, other sustainable ways. I would appreciate if I finish before you interrupt me. Thank you. Other sustainable ways that we can generate income within each country before you go into the idea of foreign aid. That was the whole idea of the presentation I gave. Now, I would also say this, that at the conclusion of my presentation, I also said that when we run alone, we run fast. And when we run alone, we run fast. But when we run together, we run far. Now, the idea is this. I said it takes myself here in Germany, the Africans at home, to come together, because the government is not an abstract term. It's human beings that run this economy. The foreign aids come and people lose that money and not contribute that money into the projects that are supposed to, where that money is supposed to be channeled into. It's not a ghost that embezzled that money. So we rebrand ourselves before we can rebrand our nation. It takes a transformed man to transform a nation. So the whole idea of foreign investment is good. We need PPPs, like I said, government-private partnership. There's no country that's an island. Things come from other country into Germany. Things come from the US to the UK and the likes. So nobody is an island. But the thing is, we need to rebrand ourselves. We need to work. Our leaders need to understand that the interest of the country comes first before personal interest. If you and I put that into consideration first, when we become leaders, I think Africa will go a lot more. At this point, I have to stop because time is not on my side.